In 2 minutes, ma'am. We're still waiting for the other participants to come
Okay.
in.
You let us know. You let me know when you're ready to start.
Yes, Miss Robin.
Now? Okay.
No, 2 minutes, I think, Robin.
Oh,
7
2 minutes.
o'clock.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Okay. Too keen.
2 minutes. You can see the participants growing. It's 19 at the moment.
All right.
Shall we make a start, Joanna? What do you think?
Yes, yes. You can already start.
We can
Miss
start.
Robin. Yes, yes.
Okay. Welcome everyone to this session on how to enter the New Zealand market. We're really excited that you're also very interested, and we hope that this is really helpful to you and that we maybe do see you in the New Zealand market in the future. So tonight we've got myself. I'm Robin Pickerel, CEO of FANS, and I've been here for the last 8 years. And we have Brad Jacobs, who'll present on the Coffee Club, and Brad's our chair of FANS. We have Stuart Gurman from the Stuart Gurman Law Office, a very prominent lawyer in franchising in New Zealand, and the right person to go to if you've got any questions. He's also a past chair of the Franchise Association. And we have Callum Floyd, our vice chair and managing director of franchise consultants, who can help with anything related to setting up a franchise in New Zealand and has a lot of market knowledge as well. So if we just move to the first slide, as I say, I've been here for 8 years. I don't think you need to know any more about me right now. I think it's all about FANS tonight. So the Franchise Association is the peak body for franchising in New Zealand, and we deal with government and industry forums, and obviously have a number of members. So we're founded in 1996 to bring members of the community together. We set standards and we provide a signal of confidence to potential and existing franchisees. We're sharing information, experiences, and we really work to promote good practice in franchising. Our FANS members include franchisors, service providers, franchisees, and individuals, but mostly franchisors and service providers second. FANS is a member of the Asia Pacific Franchise Confederation and the World Franchise Council. So we like to keep up to speed with what everyone's doing around the world, so that we see that as very important. For franchising standards in New Zealand, we like to set standards for good practice. It's an unregulated environment, and Stuart will talk more about this. So we have our own set of standards, which are very valuable to franchisors and potential and existing franchisees. Our membership is an important signal, we believe, and so we try to differentiate between a member and a non-member by using our logo and promoting a message, look for the sign before you sign. So if they've got a member badge alongside them, we know that they're committed to the fans codes and best practice. So we have a code of ethics and a code of practice and our rules for our association, which are all very, very important to us. And unless you commit to those, it's not possible to gain membership to fans. We have an independent scrutineer who will validate that our potential members are going to be able to meet those standards and have done the appropriate things through their documentation to meet our requirements. We have a very strong national conference every year, and that's been running since 1996. Generally, we run it for 2 days. And if this is something you're thinking of coming to New Zealand, I'd highly recommend that you consider coming out to one of our conferences. It's quite international in flavour. We have speakers from the US quite frequently, from Australia and from New Zealand, and the best knowledge that we can gather on franchising comes together at this conference, and it's a really good place to be. We also have our awards. It's one of our highlights of the year. So we run awards. We open them in about April of each year, and come November, we have a very lovely gala dinner to congratulate people or franchisors and franchisees from across New Zealand who have gained the right level of achievement to be honoured with an award in different categories. Things like, home and lifestyle, retail, hospitality. They might have a marketing award, that type of thing. But we have about 13, 14 awards, and that's been going since really pretty much the beginning of the association as well. Advocacy is becoming a big part of what we do in New Zealand. As I said before, we don't really have any specific legislation, but we do like to stay in touch with government and get them to understand the model of franchising, how it works, and protect the development and sustainability of franchisor and franchisee businesses. We do submissions and to discuss papers and proposed reforms, so that there's been a little bit more of that in recent years. So we have an advocacy and legislation committee that work on this, and then we also talk with what we call MB, which is our Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. That's where the policymakers sit. So we try to have a very good relationship with them. We meet with MPs, Ministers of Parliament, and other officials, and we do our best to educate our members on best practice and any upcoming law changes. Franchising research is something that we're very good at in New Zealand, I have to say, and was probably initiated some time back by the board, and Callum probably led a lot of this research in the early days getting it founded. We have regular surveys, and we outsource it to a university so that it's very credible and very independent of fans. Obviously, we have a little bit of involvement in helping set up the questions, etc. And so then it gives us a lot of data on what's happening in New Zealand, how many business format franchises there are, the dollar value that we contribute to the business of New Zealand, and the number of people involved, the number of franchisees involved. So you can see there on the screen some of those statistics, and we have a full report which is downloadable from our website. And if you're thinking of entering our market, probably a very valuable resource to have a look at. We will be doing another one of these. We do them about every 3 years, so we'll be doing another one of these later this year. And so we're really looking forward to seeing how the market's changed in that time. The prospective franchisee training, a really, really good course, and we would encourage, this is a free course, it's available on our website, and we encourage our franchisors to get their potential franchisees to do this course, because it shows that they're serious about franchising. It covers some really good basic information that they may not learn otherwise, and it also sort of test their knowledge. There's a few questions at the end of it, and it gives the franchisor some confidence that this potential franchisee is really serious about franchising. It's extremely valuable. There's 5 modules of about 45 minutes, so it's not too difficult to do. And then the franchisee gets a certificate at the end of it to show that they've completed it. So a real win for both the potential franchisee and the franchisor. Okay, so now that's my little bit. We're handing over to Callum, who will tell you a little bit more on the New Zealand franchising market.
Well, thank you very much, Robin, and greetings, everyone. Lovely to be here with you. So I'm going to give you a bit of overview of New Zealand itself and also franchising within New Zealand. It's a little picture of Auckland there, our largest city here in the North Island, where Stuart, Brad and myself are coming from today. Robin is in Tauranga. So I suppose just a few facts about New Zealand in terms of sort of size and population and so forth, and the size of our economy. So I guess a relatively small country in terms of population. So we're sort of 5.1 million at the moment, GDP of around 250 billion US, and land mass of about 260,000 square kilometers, actually similar in size to the Philippines in total in terms of land mass, similar in size to the United Kingdom in land mass, but just organized in a different way. 2 main islands, North Island and South Island, and they're both similar in size, but one of them, the North Island, where Auckland is has most of the population. So 3/4 of the population live in the North Island, a quarter obviously in the South Island, and Auckland, which is about there on the map, if you can see my cursor, has about 1/3 of New Zealand's total population now. It has grown a lot and continues to grow. So a big part of any entry into New Zealand clearly is going to involve Auckland. Our GDP, just to put things in perspective, about US 48,000 per capita, quite similar to the United Kingdom, a little bit less than the US itself, just sort of in relative terms to see where we sit. In terms of other key cities, I mean, Auckland, as I mentioned, about 1/3 of the total population. Sort of scaling down from there, we've got Wellington, about 500,000, if you can consider Wellington and surrounds. That's also on the North Island. Christchurch, the biggest city in the South Island, almost 400,000, so about 8% of the population. We've got Hamilton and Tauranga, quite big cities here in the North Island, and Dunedin, which is the second largest city in the South Island, to give you a little bit of perspective. In terms of size, sorry, I have to put a motorbike picture in there. That's my motorbike in remote South Island a couple of weeks ago. New Zealand is very pretty, obviously. It's a very scenic country, as well as providing great opportunity. But to give you a bit of an idea in terms of distance, because distance is important for considering if you're entering New Zealand, given your outlets and things are likely to be quite far apart in places. So from top to bottom, it's about 2,000 kilometres, or Auckland to Christchurch, so the main city in the North Island to main city in the South Island, it's about 1,000 kilometres. And then there's obviously the stretch of water called the Cook Strait in between. That's about a 3.5-hour ferry ride, just to give you an idea. Most people would fly, but it's possible to drive. And if you're pretty out there, it's possible to drive it in a day. I can tell you that. That bike's done it. So about our economy, it's a strong economy, as you might have gathered from the sort of the GDP numbers, and it's not a hugely indebted country. Our New Zealand national debt to GDP is just under 50%. It's grown around COVID times, as you can imagine, and some of the natural disasters like the Christchurch earthquakes and things that we had. Unemployment's pretty good, sort of just under 4%, although that might climb a little bit this year. We've got a very stable government with the MMP system, the mixed member proportional system, so nothing radical happens there. Inflation is relatively high in New Zealand terms at the moment, but it's a very stable country in terms of inflation overall, and we're really hoping that number will continue to come back, as will interest rates. And then to give you a bit of a perspective on sort of wage rates and things, our median hourly earnings are about $31, which is about $20 US. Minimum wage in New Zealand, which is mandated, is $23 or about $14. Housing is actually quite expensive in New Zealand. It's one of sort of the challenges really for New Zealanders, is the cost of housing. So just to give you a bit of an idea, median house value in New Zealand is about $760,000 overall, or about almost $1 million in Auckland. And in Auckland, that's about $590,000 US. So it's certainly higher than the average house price in the US, just to give you a bit of an idea of relativity. So a strong economy and stable economy overall, it's fair to say. In terms of New Zealanders, and really I think sort of one of the areas of attractiveness for entering New Zealand, New Zealanders in general have a very sort of open perspective, a very international perspective. Many New Zealanders, as they would have grown up, would have done sort of what we call an OE, or an overseas experience, sometimes between high school and university, sometimes, just between jobs. So we'll have worked overseas, sometimes in many countries, and certainly travelled through a lot more. So have a really good international perspective and open to new ideas and seeing things, bringing things back to New Zealand, adopting new trends and the like. And an overall very friendly and very respectful of a lot of different cultures. One of the important things to remember about New Zealand is the importance of Maori culture and our Maori population, and Maori as our Indigenous people here in New Zealand. And Maori culture is a really integral part of life here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so it's really important that if you're thinking about entering New Zealand, that you really sort of understand this, but also think about how you might integrate this into your activities and business. So and likewise with any partners that you work with, it is very important that they take that similar view as well. Maori culture and appreciation for Maori culture is really increasing too in New Zealand. It has in recent years. The use of Maori language has really increased and become almost commonplace for the majority of New Zealanders. You'll see that in expressions that New Zealanders work, like using the word mahi instead of work. Ngā mihi, which means acknowledgement, and things you'll often find instead of sort of kind regards at the end of a message. Or kia kaha, which was a big one, particularly after the earthquakes, or when things happen that are quite tough to deal with. People say that instead of sort of keep strong. And also some of New Zealand's city names have got a Maori name, and they're becoming more commonplace. So things like that are important to remember, and it's really important to make sure that sort of you fit in and very respectful of Maori culture. In terms of franchising in New Zealand, so I was thinking about some of the stats. Robin gave you a little bit of a picture of that a second ago. I'll do a little bit more of a deeper dive. But as Robin mentioned, and whether or not you can see this presentation afterwards in terms of this clickable link, there's also a link at the bottom there that has a direct link through to the research report, but also on the FANZ website there is a link as well to the full survey. But just to give you some top level numbers so you know about franchising, I suppose the key message here too is New Zealand is incredibly intensively into franchising, relative to the size of the population, and when we think about its contribution to the economy. So the last survey, 2021, there'll be more now. There were 590 different brands franchising. You'll be interested to know too, about 70% of those are New Zealand founded systems. So New Zealand also very entrepreneurial in creating concepts and franchising those as well. But as you'll see from the sort of 29-30%, we're also interested in overseas brands and offers as well. Business format franchising does make a big make up a big part of the economy. So you'll see represents about 12% of GDP in New Zealand. Or if you also include the vehicle and fuel retailing, it's about 20%. So it's a substantial part of the total economy, and it is maturing. So a lot of those systems getting older and growing, obviously. A lot involved in online sales as well, which is a consideration, and touch wood, disputation levels in New Zealand really have always been very low and continue to be very low as well. So certainly New Zealand is a country, I think, where very good franchising is done. We've got very good franchisors who deal in the main very fairly with franchisees, and there's a relatively low level of disputation overall, and I think as compared to some other countries. I won't go through this total list, but I suppose just to give you a bit of an idea as a resource, if you imagine all of the different sort of industry sectors and subsectors, franchising has a place really within all of those here. So that's not to suggest that there isn't, another concept or another brand, that there's not room for. There certainly is, but you will find franchising evident in a lot of parts of New Zealand business. The big sectors, if you to sort of hone in on them, certainly are retail, construction, accommodation and food, sort of administration and support services, and education and training. Those are the sort of the main industries, I suppose, where sort of the highest degrees of franchising concentration are. This is just another one just to give you a perspective of I suppose, how much New Zealand loves franchising and how pervasive franchising is in New Zealand. If you think about the number of franchised units per population and compare that to Australia, which is also very highly franchised, you can see, on a relative basis, we're almost twice as franchised as Australia is, and more so than the US. So I think in general, in terms of the number of franchisors and franchisees per capita, we're either the top, or I think possibly second on one of those to Singapore, but we're neck and neck. One thing we thought you might be a little bit interested in, so my company, Franchise Consultants, and the main publisher here in New Zealand, Franchise New Zealand magazine, conducted in 2022 a survey of potential franchisees. This has got some useful information on who's looking to buy a franchise in New Zealand. We do have a research report available on that as well. We're happy to share that with you, and we're also repeating that survey in the next couple of months this year as well. And it's useful to see, what New Zealanders are looking for when they're looking to buy a franchise, and a whole lot of other demographics. So I've got 2 or 3 slides just to show you just a little bit of a taster of that. But again, you're welcome to have this report as well. But to give you a bit of an idea in terms of, what are New Zealand prospective franchisees looking for, what is their main motivation for buying a franchise, you'll be pleased to see the majority want to build a business. They want to build a greater income and wealth building potential. So that's good. But second there, which is also important to recognize, is better life balance, then more security and stability, achieve a personal challenge, which of course, you'll get by starting a business, and a franchise, make a career change. So yeah, useful to see what some of these main motivations are, because they give you a bit of an idea for what people are looking for, but also how you might try and be attractive to New Zealand franchisees. I wonder, I do see a question has popped up, or a hand has popped up. I wonder if we might keep the questions to the end, if that's okay, Joanna, and because that might be the easiest way to deal with those. But very happy to answer any questions later on.
All right. Yes, we'll do the open forum after all the presentations.
Marvelous.
All right.
In terms of intended level of investment, you might be interested to see, the key message here is that there's a full range of levels of potential investment into different franchise opportunities, starting from the under 25 to sort of 100,000 New Zealand dollars, all the way through to about 8% of those people that were looking for a franchise were willing to spend 500,000 New Zealand dollars or more. So if yours is the sort of business format that involves quite an investment, then there are potential franchisees here that have that, that level of investment that they're considering. This message here is just pointing out really how strong the Franchise Association is and what its member standards really mean. So we asked this question of potential franchisees: how important is it that that the company is a FANZ member if they're looking to buy a franchise? And you can see the majority state that it's actually quite important that they are buying from a Franchise Association member, presumably because of the standards that FANZ brings, and that's of comfort to potential franchisees. But similarly, in terms of the advice that prospective franchisees might get, it's good if the advisors, the accountants, the lawyers, and so forth are also members. So that's important to them as well. So I'm just going to finish with a few entry considerations. So these are from my point of view. I've got my consulting company. We help companies that are looking to enter New Zealand, or businesses that are looking at buying an international master franchise from an overseas country. So these are some considerations that I'd suggest if you're thinking about entering New Zealand. The first one is that New Zealand really should be treated as its own unique market and should be considered as one market. Sometimes there's a tendency, dare we say it, to think about New Zealand as an add-on to Australia. We're not Australia. Australia is a distance away from us. We do love Australia, though, and Australians dearly, but we are a different market to Australia, so it should be considered as a separate market. It is different, and often the structure will be different for New Zealand than it will be for there. The second thing is ensuring that that you really take into consideration sort of the unique size, shape, dispersion geographically and what have you of the country, and make sure that it really all stacks up from all parties' point of view, be that yourself as the international franchisor, the New Zealand master franchisee, if that's your particular model, and unit level operations here. Do a proper feasibility study. You might be surprised. You may well need a different royalty structure. You might need to think differently about the demarcation of roles. What might be obvious and really stack up well in one country doesn't mean that it will necessarily stack up here. So we often have to have conversations with international franchisors because they do need to consider it in a different way if they really want to find someone here in New Zealand that's willing to take it on. Auckland, clearly, I know when you would have seen that slide, you would have saw, a third of the population in Auckland. You make it work in Auckland, that's already great stuff. But what I would say is, generally, knowing what we know about doing lots of feasibility studies for different companies, you typically will need a high degree of market penetration overall in New Zealand to make it really work for all stakeholders. So yes, you need to be successful in Auckland, but you will also need to have some success throughout the North Island and into the South Island as well. So we need to have that all over country perspective as well. You might be interested to know that in terms of that fourth point, that New Zealand can have some very favorable profitability metrics compared to other countries. So yeah, certainly in some sectors here, there are very good profit margins that are available when we compare ourselves, for instance, to Australia and some other countries. So you may well find that New Zealand offers a great opportunity at the unit level for producing a very good return on investment and flow on through to different levels. New Zealand, because of its size, particularly the population and the prospective number of units, may require a different structure than you're used to having in other countries that you might enter. If you think about the likes of McDonald's here in New Zealand, it's a very mature market, about 170 units. It's not thousands. So, in terms of its fees and structure, it may well be a little bit different to other countries. So you may need to think about that. We would suggest it's always wise, if possible, to consider the role of a pilot operation or a company-owned operation as part of your entry process into New Zealand. We can do a lot of work around feasibility modeling and things, but there is nothing like really trialing the business and the opportunity within New Zealand to really see what some of those metrics turn out to be. So would strongly suggest that. In terms of entry mode, most companies that enter New Zealand are entering via a country master, typically with sub-franchising rights, sometimes with a requirement to open some company operations first, but typically a country master here in New Zealand. But increasingly, in some cases, particularly from Australia, some countries are entering New Zealand directly. So maintaining their support office within another country, maybe with some local people here, but having a direct relationship with franchisees in New Zealand from their originating country. And then finally, it's a little bit related to the first or second point, making sure that the country master has good, viable potential returns, particularly given the size of the New Zealand market, to make sure that they can make and build a great business as well, and it doesn't require them to have New Zealand completely maxed out before they make a good return. That's not going to incentivize a good New Zealand master. So it's making sure that really stacks up. I guess finally, what I would say there too is do reach out to fans, to Robin and the team. There are a range of different advisors here in New Zealand, many of whom are also members of fans. And so certainly Robin, I'm sure will happily point you in the right direction, and we can give you whatever support we can. Okay, so I might now, I think, move over and pass you over to Stuart Gurman from Stuart Gurman Law. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Callum, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Callum said, I'm Stuart Gurman. I've been a franchise lawyer for over 40 years, and I founded my law firm 31 years ago. So Callum had a slide about New Zealanders love franchising. Well, I love franchising. I'm passionate about it. The 2021 survey, both Robin and Callum have mentioned it. I won't go over, but I do want to say that New Zealand is the most franchised country in the world per head of population, with our 590 business format franchisors. So Robin and I have just returned recently from Phoenix, Arizona, from the IFA convention with 4,000 there. And we happily said that statistic to Americans and Australians and Canadians, and everyone is quite astounded. So we do beat America and Australia at the moment per capita. Next slide, I think, Callum, because we've done all that. Thanks. Right, legal position. So unlike the Philippines and most countries now, there are no specific franchising laws in New Zealand. So the UK, Singapore, New Zealand are there. I note that in the Philippines, franchising arrangements are categorized as technology transfer agreements, TTAs. So you should know all about that. But even though we do not have specific franchising laws, there are a number of laws that affect franchising, including the Commerce Act, Fair Trading Act, and the Contract and Commercial Law Act. Robin has covered the FANS, which has, so all members of FANS must abide by the Code of Practice and the Code of Ethics. And that means that franchisors must believe in a dispute resolution process, mediation, and a 7-day cooling off period. Next slide, please, Callum. So all members of FANS must comply with both codes. The Code of Practice looks at compliance, disclosure, certification, the cooling off period, and dispute resolution. And the Code of Ethics has about 6 bullet points. The one I like most is that all members must act in an honourable and fair manner in all business dealings. And that fairness is very important in franchising. And it sort of leads into the doctrine of good faith, which isn't law yet, but a number of cases are mentioning it. And disclosure documents. So all franchisor members of FANS must have a disclosure document. It's checked by the scrutineer, which Robin said. If an overseas franchise system enters New Zealand and you don't join FANS, you don't need a disclosure document. However, I act for a lot of overseas franchisors coming in, especially from Australia and the US, and a number want to join FANS. So it's pretty easy because their disclosure documents are so bulky that you have to comply with our requirements, and you can reduce the length from about 100 pages to 20. So most of the information is contained. Next slide, Callum. So the disclosure document must include the following. So details of the franchisor, the directors, including experience, and a viability statement with key financial information of the franchisor. So that gives franchisees confidence. Importantly, details of any bankruptcies, receiverships, liquidations. So again, people need to know that, and it's just a matter of fact. Criminal, civil, or administrative proceedings within the past 5 years. So a number of very sophisticated, good franchisors have been involved in litigation for one cause or another, and that just has to be disclosed. Summary of the main particulars and features of the franchise. List of components making up the franchise purchase. That's very important. So if you're a potential franchisee, what you want to know is, what will it cost for me to get into this franchise? What's the breakdown of the components? And then what will I pay on an ongoing basis? So there must be no surprises. Details of any financial requirements by the franchisor or the franchisee, and other information. And there's a tendency for some franchisors, if they have a good candidate, to try and plug the gap between what a franchisee might have as cash resources or equity, borrowing from a bank. And a couple of franchisors I've been involved with have helped and sort of said, "Oh, don't pay the full 40,000 fee, pay me 30 and pay 10,000 in a year, I'll help you." Really bad. So I say that franchisors are not a bank, and they should not act as a bank. So if a franchisee cannot afford the total purchase price to get in, then they shouldn't get in. Next slide, please. Right, so I mentioned the Commerce Act. So the Commerce Act is looking at competition, unfair competition, and breaches. And it was amended in 2017 by bringing in cartels, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Cartels are sort of around the world now. The Amendment Act made significant changes, replaced the prohibition on price fixing between competitors, and expanded the prohibition on cartel provisions. The change also extended to market allocations and output restrictions, as well as price fixing. So because of that legislation, we encourage franchisors to insert extra clauses in their franchise agreements when the legislation came into effect, to especially the collaborative aspect. So, franchisor, franchisee is a collaboration, and the Commerce Act and the amendments are looking exactly at that. So, and there's a number of other clauses that had to go in. And we say to franchisors, keep a log of and explain why these clauses are in there, because if you're investigated later, there's nothing like the written word, and you can pull out a manual on that exact point. Next clause, thanks. Slide. So clauses that set or influence prices, restrict output, allocate markets may be caught. Another consideration is whether the collaborative activity exemption or vertical activity exemption will apply. So that's an application to the Commerce Commission to see if you can get an exemption, and it's only been done once, and the Commerce Commission declined. Prohibition on cartel provisions, which extends to market allocations and output restrictions, as well as to price fixing. So the worst thing that franchisors can do is sort of to get together, and it may be price fixing or product stacking, anything. The airlines have been caught, the freight forwarders have been caught, and the real estate companies in New Zealand were caught a few years ago. So the 5 main real estate companies were prosecuted by the Commerce Commission because they were interfering with the marketing. We've got an outfit here called Trade Me, which does very well, and they were changing their terms for purchases of houses, and one email was all it needed for the Commerce Commission to prove that there had been interference in the freedom of relations and market allocation. So got to be very careful with the written word. Then the Commerce Criminalisation of Cartels Amendment Act came in 2019. So now it's a criminal offence for cartel conduct, and directors of, let's say, a franchise or company can be criminally liable. There are penalties, imprisonment and fines. So we haven't had a case on that yet. And then, of course, even though New Zealand's got no specific laws affecting, well, the Fair Trading Act was changed. So unfair contract terms came in. It had been in Australia for a number of years. So it's now law in New Zealand since 16 August 2022. It's not scary, but you need to go through franchise agreements to see whether there are an oversupply of what I call unfair contract terms. So it affects all standard form trade contracts, and that includes a franchise agreement, and you'll see the definition there. So what we did as a firm was to recommend to franchisors that we review their current franchise agreement in relation to the unfair contract terms. Now, we did that well before 16 August. So I think we started in about April and May, and all the franchisors accepted. We gave a fixed fee of $1,000 New Zealand to review your agreement, take out clauses which we deem to be unfair and tell you why, change or amend clauses which could be watered down. And most franchisors accepted our advice. A couple of them challenged and said, no, we want the clause in. And I said, that's fine. You take the risk, but you should document why you want it and the effect it might have. Next slide, Callum. Thank you. So the new law will not apply to the following contractual terms: definition of the main subject matter of the contract, setting the upfront price payable under the contracts, so long as the price term is clear and unambiguous. So that's a good one. And any terms that are required or expressly permitted by any legislation. So they're the sort of definites. Everything else is indefinite, and you take the risk. The extent to which the term is clear and the context of the contract as a whole will also be taken into account. However, the changes will not disadvantage a business that has a legitimate business interest, and the term is necessary to protect that interest. So all franchisors, if you look at your franchise agreements in the Philippines and anywhere, will contain what I would say is an unfair contract term. It's the degree of that unfairness. So no one knows until you're challenged, but I will say the smell test is quite interesting. So if you're a prospective franchisee and you think a clause is unfair, then have a chat to the franchisor. Next slide, please. And then unconscionable conduct is another legal principle that's been in Australia and other countries for many years, and New Zealand decided to bring it in as well. So we often follow Australia in our laws, but we lead them in other areas like GST. We were 10 years ahead of Australia with GST, and the Personal Property Securities Act, we were years ahead of Australia as well. They followed us. So as Callum said, New Zealand is not Australia and Australia is not New Zealand. And although we look at the laws in both sides of the country, they are different. So the unconscionable conduct threshold is relatively high and is focused on egregious behaviour. So you'll see there the unconscionable conduct and trade provisions are much broader, and as they apply to all conduct and not just contractual terms. So look, the words there are all conduct. So the term is not defined, so it's very unhelpful in legislation when you don't define a term, but the court may take into account the following: the relative bargaining power of the parties. So that's always tricky because really the franchisor has the stronger bargaining power, as you know. The extent to which the parties acted in good faith, I mentioned that before. So just remember that phrase, acting in good faith. So as a franchisor, you should always try and act in good faith towards your franchisees, and vice versa. A franchisee should act in good faith towards the franchisor. Whether the affected person was reasonably able to protect its interest, and whether unfair pressure or tactics were used. So that's a very interesting one too. So the gun to the head approach, and I've seen it in many over my years, where if you don't sign this, there will be consequences. Okay, so that's unfair pressure. That'll be unconscionable conduct. It could also go further and breach the Crimes Act as to blackmail. So you've got to be careful of all those terms, but they are very helpful. Next slide, please. Covenants against competition. So all franchisors deserve to protect their franchise system, their investment, their intellectual property, what they put into this, into their system. Franchisors issue franchise agreements to franchisees. In return, there are rules. And one of the main rules for a franchisee is, you don't know anything about this business, I will train you. You will come in, you work hard, you can build up the business, sell at a point for hopefully a good capital gain. But if you choose to leave, and there's two ways of leaving. If you are terminated because you're what I call naughty, or the term of the agreement expires through the affliction of time. So in either of those cases, you cannot take the intellectual property and know-how of a franchisee and a franchisor, and you cannot set up in business next door or in a close proximity and take all the secrets. So the courts have deemed it's reasonable for a franchisor to impose a contractual restraint upon competitive behaviour by a franchisee or an ex-franchisee. But the key point here is that such restraints must not be deemed unreasonable. Can you just go back one, Callum? Thanks. Such restraints must not exceed the court's notion of reasonableness. So what is reasonableness? Well, Section 83 of that Act helps, because there's a definite section on restraints of trade. And basically, if it reaches court and a High Court judge needs to determine whether the restraint is reasonable or unreasonable, then under 83, they can put a line through it and say it's totally unreasonable, unenforceable, I'm not interested, or they can modify it in some way, or they can decline to enforce it. They've got total power. So next slide, please, Callum. It's very incumbent now on lawyers, franchise lawyers, to take great care when drafting restraint clauses, because if your clause ends up in court and a judge doesn't like it, your franchisor will be most disappointed that you didn't draft it properly and it's unenforceable. So there's been a number of restraint cases in the franchising sector. When I say both New Zealand and Australia, they're really worldwide. There's been a number in United Kingdom. I was involved in the Water Babies case 2020. So Water Babies is a UK franchisor. If you look at the video, it's amazing. So it's teaching babies to swim, and they're underwater half the time, and they're little. They're very little, 6 months onwards. And Kelly Williams was a New Zealander living in England, decided to come back to New Zealand. And as Callum said, Wellington's a city in the North Island. She was from Wellington, the bottom of the North Island. So she went back there. She opened a Water Babies franchise. She operated it for a number of years. Then she decided not to renew. And Water Babies franchise was puzzled. And she said, I want to do something else. Oh boy, she did something else. She got her cousin to form a company, take all the IP, change the name to Swim Babies. And so we had to take action. We got a High Court order, injunction, and restraint of trade order, and she suffered. The other case I was involved with was Open to View, where I acted for the master franchisor, M&L Holdings, and that was to do with real estate photography. I think it's worldwide now. And this particular franchisee liked it, decided to not renew, and he just went out on his own, just about in the same territory, doing the same thing. So he had to be closed down as well. Next slide, please. The banks in New Zealand are very supportive of franchising, in particular Westpac, ASB and ANZ. And they have dedicated managers who either travel throughout New Zealand or in Auckland and go south. And the banks will provide unsecured lending for qualified franchise systems, and there's a number of those. So if a franchisor needs funding from a bank, they'll let the bank sort of get all over their system, give them all the numbers. And if there's a number of franchisees coming up, there's some unsecured lending available. Next slide, Callum. So what's happening in 2024? Well, we're a very attractive market for franchising, and franchisors from the Philippines are most welcome. We've deregulated for small business. We have a robust legal system and a double taxation treaty between our countries. For example, the non-resident withholding tax rate for royalties is 15%, which means that if you have a franchisee in New Zealand or a master and you want to remit royalties back to the Philippines, then the master either deducts 15% and pays it to the Inland Revenue, and you can claim a tax deduction credit. Or a lot of franchisors overseas want the full amount, and then the non-resident withholding tax, the master will have to pay that. That's grossed up. Many franchisors from Australia, UK, and the UK into New Zealand, and there's a very positive environment for overseas franchisors to find master franchisees or unit franchisees in New Zealand. So the last couple of slides from Callum were right on this point and very helpful. So if you're serious about going overseas, don't forget New Zealand. We'd welcome you. Thank you. And I'd now like to introduce Brad Jacobs. He's the master franchisee along with Andy for the Coffee Club. He's from Australia. He's lived in New Zealand many years now. He goes back to Australia to see his mother and relations, but I don't think he wants to live there now. But he might tell you differently. So Brad, welcome.
Thank you, Stuart. No, hopefully after nearly 20 years, I'm a New Zealander. Thanks, everyone. I'll move through a few points quite quickly, just a bit of an introduction to the Coffee Club, and then I'll spend a little bit of time on our story and perhaps some of the learnings that we had along the way, good, bad, and ugly, so to speak. So first of all, I thought high level I'd start with the vision, purpose and core values of the Coffee Club and what we're about. So the goal is to be the most loved cafe, and on a New Zealand level, obviously the most loved cafe in New Zealand. What do? We provide good food, great service and excellent coffee. We provide a welcoming meeting place, and we want to be the answer to the question, where will I meet you? So we're very much a European style cafe with a dining in concept, as opposed to an American coffee bar, Starbucks takeaway kind of model. Our core values, I won't go through all of those line by line, but customer service, teamwork, accountability, positive relationships, and continual improvement. So that's what we set out to achieve. From there, some numbers, I guess, if you like, about the Coffee Club. 400 plus cafes around the world, 67 of those in New Zealand, and we expect to keep growing in New Zealand at 4 to 5 cafes per year. At 67 cafes, that makes us quite a large food and beverage franchise system in New Zealand. Anything above probably 50 would be quite large in New Zealand. Anything above 100 would be very large. So small population. So it is something that you do need to consider definitely. Probably the number on there that I'm most proud of is that we are the most recognised cafe brand in New Zealand. About 82% of people in New Zealand recognising our brand. So we're very much a household name now. Thanks, Callum. Locations. So I thought this would be helpful, and it ties in nicely to what everyone before me has kind of talked about. The Coffee Club, we are very heavily weighted in Auckland. So we actually have about 60-odd% of our cafes in Auckland, compared to, say, about 35% of the population. We are not strong on the South Island of New Zealand, and that is where we have a lot of growth opportunity over the next few years. So, but you can see that we do go very much from the top of the country right to the very south of the country, and those couple of love hearts at the very bottom with the 2 and the 1s, they are much lower than anything in Australia, to give you a bit of a concept. So it's cold down there, it's snowing territory, and it is very remote and often quite challenging in terms of supply chain and those kind of things. It can also be quite expensive to travel around New Zealand when servicing franchisees, because we generally have one national airline, and we have a second smaller airline, which is a subsidiary of Qantas from Australia, but they don't service a lot of those smaller regional towns. So it is something to consider, and what I call orphan stores. When you do have orphan stores in some of those regional towns where potentially you will only ever have one franchisee, you need to consider the cost to service that franchisee properly. So yes, our growth for the next few years is predominantly everywhere but Auckland. There will be some growth in Auckland as the population keeps growing here, but it really is the South Island that's the focus for us over the next few years. Thanks. I put this in mainly because this is the structure of how we work with our franchisees. So basically everything we do, whether it's training manuals, whether it's franchisee roadshows or conferences, our induction programs, everything that we do comes back to what we call our 6 building blocks. And so essentially mission and core values sets the direction. People comes in second, being that we're cafes and we simply can't operate without our people. Marketing comes in third. We need those people to bring in the marketing teams to bring in the customers. Operations and supply, obviously, to provide the product to the customers that marketing brings in. Network is what we call property. So our locations, refurbishments, maintenance, keeping the cafes looking sharp, and financial management. So at the end of the day, we're all in business, and the reality is that there needs to be a return, or it's not a viable business to pursue. So when we go on to our team, we've got a team here of 21, and I would probably be a little bit stronger even than what maybe Callum mentioned before. And I think that it is vital that you have a team in New Zealand, and perhaps even what Stuart said, and I think everyone has said it, Australia is very different to New Zealand, similar in some ways, and New Zealand is very different to many other countries in the world. So I think part of our success has been that we are very New Zealand based, and that we have made ourselves very self-sufficient in New Zealand and don't rely on our master franchisor in Australia to provide us with too much. We have a very stable team, and you can probably see that by some of the numbers of service there for our team. And if I look at our team of 21, about 14 and a half of those people are marketing and operations. So that's what we really provide our franchisees with. We have relatively small finance team, relatively small IT team, a relatively small property team. So we're not providing our franchisees with significant HR or financial services. We use third-party resources for both of those. And I'm not saying that's correct. Some franchise groups may choose to have a full in-house HR team, but the model we've chosen to go with is that we really heavily focus our support for franchisees on marketing and operations. And then we use third-party providers to support us with things like financial management, HR, IT, those kind of areas. So yeah, you can see it's a very good team, and I'm extremely proud to have a very multicultural team. I think across 21 people, the team speaks something like about 17 languages, and they're pretty much that's a pretty great reflection of New Zealand, to be honest. And that's not uncommon to be in a room in particularly Auckland, not so much other places, but it's not uncommon to be in a room in Auckland with 10 people in the room, and perhaps only 1 or 2 are actually born in New Zealand. So New Zealand is very open and welcoming, and our team reflects that. So moving on. Store designs, I just sort of put a couple of images in there just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we do. So again, we're very heavily focused on the in-store experience. We do have some cabinet offer, but it's not our hero. Very much a full menu offering is what we do, and I think we'll see that on the next slide. Yes, so very much breakfast, brunch and lunch. We do have some cafes that trade in the evening, but again, it's not our strong point. Our heroes, if you like, are definitely breakfast, brunch and lunch. Thanks. Okay. I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide just because this is, I guess, some of the key events of our history over the last 18 odd years, and it also highlights some of the challenges we've had. So I guess right from day one, I would say we made life a little bit difficult for ourselves with opening our first cafe in Wellington. coming into New Zealand again, I probably wouldn't do that the same. I'd probably focus our attention more on Auckland initially. The reason it made life a little bit difficult for us is we opened our first cafe in Wellington. We needed to own and operate that ourselves before we got permission from our franchisor, our master franchisor, to start sub-franchising in New Zealand. And very quickly we established that we needed to be in Auckland for landlords, for suppliers, just for doing business in general. So we were based in Wellington, owning and operating our own cafe, proving the model. And then when we did get permission to start franchising, we needed to relocate again after only being in the country for 6 or 7 months. So probably made life a little bit difficult for ourselves. We then did that. We relocated in early 2006 and we started franchising about mid 2006 in Auckland. And our next couple of cafes were in Auckland. And then we probably chose to make life difficult for ourselves again by starting to open up cafes around the country. And we went straight to Christchurch initially, and then we went to a couple of the other smaller regional cities around the North Island. And so by the time we got to cafe number 7, we were in 5 different cities, which again, I probably wouldn't do the same, but it was the opportunity at the time. And it certainly didn't impact on us negatively, other than coming back to that point I made before about the cost of servicing franchisees. So we were traveling a lot and spending a lot on travel and accommodation when our revenue as franchisor was actually fairly small. Things were going along quite nicely for the first 3 years or so, and then we hit the GFC, the global financial crisis, and New Zealand went into a fairly heavy recession, and that really hurt us, and that lingered in New Zealand for really probably a good 18 months, perhaps nearly 2 years. New Zealand was quite slow to come out of that recession, and it, again, as franchisor, we'd managed to grow to about 20 cafes by that stage, and we didn't lose any franchisees during the recessionary period, which we were very proud of. But as franchisor, it did very much hurt us, and it put us under the treading water kind of stage for a little while. So we got through that, and I don't think we would do anything different there. We put a lot of funds into supporting franchisees. We took some concessions on royalties, and we provided franchisees with some support and assistance where needed. But we made sure that we didn't lose any franchisees, and I think it also built a lot of goodwill for our brand in the general market in New Zealand, whether it was with banks, landlords, potential franchisees, suppliers, whoever it might have been. We got focused on growing again as we started to come out of that recessionary period, and we entered the New Zealand Franchise Awards for the first time, and we won our first Food and Beverage Franchise Award. So we won Food and Beverage Franchise System of the Year. We've gone on now to win about 24 awards at the Franchise Awards across a range of different categories, and that makes us the most awarded cafe or food and beverage franchise system, and it makes us just generally the most awarded franchise system in New Zealand now. So that's something that we're extremely proud of, but it was important in those early days to get that recognition, and that helped us to start growing again. We thought we were nicely back on track, and then unfortunately we got another a little challenge thrown at us, which was the Christchurch earthquake, and we lost a cafe in that earthquake. Unfortunately, it never reopened. We didn't lose any lives, thankfully, but we did lose a cafe there, and that was a really testing time for New Zealand. And while Christchurch is a city of only 500,000 people, it really shook New Zealand. Really did, ripple right through the country, and it caused a lot of uncertainty. It caused a lot of financial stress for the whole country, government included, in the rebuild. And it really set us back again. And so we were, obviously fairly frustrated by that, and feeling like we'd sort of been hit with 2 fairly big challenges, one after another, that really had not been in the business plan, so to speak. We actually attended a seminar, and we heard a speaker from Subway, of all places, and they talked about the first time they went on national TV and what an impact that had on them. And I came away from that convinced that we needed to be on TV. And so we did. And it was a massive turning point for us as well. We got on TV for the first time in 2011. And to this day, we still have TV advertising in New Zealand. Obviously, it's changed over time, and we do have a lot more focus on digital and social media. And the TV budget has slowly shrunk a little over time, but it has still remained a really important part of our marketing calendar. And we're pretty well the only cafe brand that is consistently on TV. Obviously, the very large fast food guys are, of course, but no one else in our space really is consistently on TV like we are. Things started to get on the roll again, and we went on to win not just the Food and Beverage Franchise Award, but we went on to win the Supreme New Zealand Franchise Award. So that's over all franchise systems, and we've won that a couple of times now over the years. We launched a new design for our cafes in 2013, and we finally got to our 50th store opening, and that was a great celebration, and brought together a lot of people that had put in nearly 10 years work to get to that point. 2016, we got hit with another little challenge, and our very first store in Wellington ended up being closed for about a year. Unfortunately, the shopping centre that cafe was in performed poorly in the earthquake, and particularly the end of the shopping centre that we were in performed really poorly. There was a large cinema box that all but collapsed, and so we lost our number one store for nearly a year. Thankfully, it came back, and still to this day is one of our best performing stores in the country. But again, it just reminds you in a little country like New Zealand that there are challenges. Earthquakes are common, and certainly a challenge. And whether it's a natural disaster or something more sinister, those events, wherever they are in the country, really do get felt right through the whole country. Things got positive again, and we were on a beautiful streak. And in 2019, we celebrated our 11th straight year of positive like-for-like sales growth. So we were feeling really happy with that, and thinking most of the challenges were behind us. And then, of course, like everyone, our world started to crumble in early 2020. New Zealand, people talk a lot about the strict lockdowns of Melbourne in Australia, but New Zealand was right up there, and particularly Auckland. So across the sort of 2.5 years of COVID, we lost 9 weeks of trade completely, absolutely not allowed to trade at all, a complete close down. And we also lost about another probably 26, 28 weeks of having customers in the cafes where we were only allowed to do takeaway or delivery. We're not great at takeaway or delivery. And if anything, we probably got caught in that period where we had focused so heavily on being an in-store brand experience that we had not set ourselves up well for the challenge of not being allowed to have customers in our cafes. So that was a difficult patch. We used the opportunity while we were tools down in the cafes to look at what would we do. And we went back to the recessionary period, and we said, well, what did we do coming out of that? And we said, well, we doubled down in terms of marketing, in terms of what we did in the cafes. And while lots of people were in fact kind of pulling back on any kind of expenditure, we went about launching a new store design, a new logo, and a whole new marketing suite. And we had that ready to go essentially as soon as we started to come out of COVID. And I think that was one of the best decisions we made. Something positive to talk to franchisees about. It gave us something positive to talk to the market about, instead of perhaps sitting there crying over an empty coffee cup. We were recognised by our international franchisor. for that, and we won our International Franchisor of the Year award, or Market of the Year from our International Franchisor, and our barista from New Zealand also won the International Barista of the Year award. So again, that gave us some great positive things to bring back to New Zealand to hype up our franchisees and our team members. Last year, we got ourselves back into positive like-for-like sales growth, and we also opened 5 new cafes. So we got ourselves growing again. And in that period, and considering what I talked about before with COVID, we really realized that we needed to do some work in our digital space. And so last year, we launched a program to roll out a new point of sale system and a whole digital transformation program. We knew that our franchisees were not in a financial position to fund that themselves after having essentially, lost nearly 2 years of their business. And so that we made a decision as franchisor that we would fund that because we saw it as such an important project. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on that on the next slide. And then final point, the focus for this year, just continued focus on growth. And my business partner has this saying that I love, evolution, not revolution. We're not setting out to turn everything on its head. It's not broken. We don't need to. But we do need to always keep evolving to make sure that we don't start to fall behind our competitors, or we don't start to fall behind the market in general. So we'll move on. So digital technology, as I say, this has been a big focus for us for the second half of last year, and will remain a big focus for probably pretty well the first half of this year, right through to mid-year. Doing a lot of work on click and collect, a lot of work on table ordering, so customers self-ordering at the table. Interestingly, it's not very common in New Zealand in general yet. It's obviously growing very quickly around the world, and including in Australia, but it's not that common in New Zealand yet. We really will be a leader there when we have that live in every single one of our cafes by the end of next week. Order tracking, customers being able to see where they're at with their order. A completely new digital loyalty card or loyalty program. And interestingly, our loyalty program is a paid subscription. It's almost a bit like the Costco model. So you pay to be a member of the coffee club. You don't have to be. Of course, any regular customer is welcome to come in. But that's, I believe, other than Costco, which has only just come to New Zealand last year, I don't think anyone else has a paid loyalty program in New Zealand. And a complete range of digital gift cards, so both physical and digital. So they're our key projects for this year, and we see huge growth opportunity for our franchisees by still focusing on having customers in our cafes, but making sure that we're better connected to them when they're in our cafes, and being able to, most importantly, better talk to them when they're not in our cafes. The next one, sustainability. Aside from the digital world, the other really big focus we have is to keep growing our initiatives around sustainability. We've got all the ones that you would expect to see. Animal welfare issues such as chicken and eggs are very, very important in New Zealand. New Zealand's a very big chicken consuming country. Things around packaging and reusing, those kind of items you'd expect as kind of standard. And if you didn't have those in place in New Zealand, I think you'd be really starting from a fair disadvantage. Obviously, we have all them. We've got a whole range of other initiatives that we're working on. We'd like to be the leader. For example, when we deleted plastic straws in our cafes, probably 5 years ago now, we were the very first major group in New Zealand to do that, well ahead of any of the fast food chains or any of our competitors. And we got a significant amount of great publicity for that, and all free, of course. So we like to try and be the leader where we can. Sometimes you have to balance those things with cost for franchisees and making sure that you're not burdening franchisees with unreasonable cost. But we've got some exciting things that we'd like to achieve this year, and if we can, again, we'll be probably the first in the market to launch some of those initiatives. I think that's me. Thank you. Yeah. Who's going to open up?
Oh, that draws us to the end of the presentation. Thank you everyone for watching. If there are any questions, Joanna, I think we could, and you're still okay with time, I'm sure we could take a question.
Yes, good afternoon. On behalf, of course, of the Asia Pacific Franchise Confederation, we would like to thank our speakers from the Franchise Association of New Zealand. Thank you so much for the very comprehensive presentation, from the overview to the entry considerations to the legal requirements in entering, legal requirements in franchising, as well as the success story of Coffee Club, an inspiring story. Even we joined the journey of Mr. Brad. Thank you so much. So we now open the floor for question and answer. Would there, from our participants, would you like to raise some questions from the presentations? You may type them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. So one of the questions here is if the speakers could share their presentation slides after the webinar. Actually, we will be posting this recording in the Asia Pacific Franchise Confederation website, so you could get access of the recording of this video. All right, so far we don't have any more questions from our participants. So maybe any parting words from our speakers or somebody from the association to represent, to have parting words to close the webinar.
Oh, perhaps I'll just say, well, thank you all for coming along and listening to us today. I think there was a lot of valuable information there, but most of all, we do welcome you to inquire further. We hope to see many of you look at New Zealand as an option, and wish you every success with your future development. So thanks for coming along this afternoon. It's been fabulous to have you with us.
All right.
So from there, maybe we say good night. Well, it's good night for us anyway. Good afternoon for you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much again. So
Yeah.
we'll see you then. Okay. All right. Thank you so much to all our
Thank you.
speakers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very
Bye.
much for organising
Bye.
it, Joanna. Much
Of
appreciated.
course, yeah, we also appreciate the organization and the conduct of this from New Zealand. All right. See you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very much again, Joanna. Much appreciated.
See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.